Konnichiwa. I'm Chaplain Mark Johnston. I am the 38th Air Defense Artillery Brigade Chaplain, and we're coming to you once again from beautiful Camp Zama in front of the beautiful Tanzawa Mountains. I hope I said that right. Welcome. I wanted to speak with you a little bit today about resiliency again. And I have a little story, of course, that I want to share with you. Mark Twain said to never engage your critics because it's like wrestling with a pig. You both get muddy and the pig likes it. But I want to say that sometimes people don't take me seriously, or they think I'm being not taking seriously the situations that we're in. But humor is part of dealing with tragedy and pain. And it's one way that my family taught me to deal with it, and it's one reason I do these videos. Is because one of the things that has to happen for us to get through a crisis, one of the things that has to happen for us to grieve and move on, is to use humor in order to do that. And that's why when I tell these stories, they may not be funny in and of themselves, but sometimes the way I tell them makes them funny. We're coming up on Mother's Day, and Mother's Day is a great time of year when we celebrate those who brought us into the world and gave us life. And I wanted to talk about a little bit about today about someone who's a mother. She's a grandmother. I guess to be a grandmother, you have to be a mother first. And my grandmother Ziegler was one of the finest people I've ever known. And she didn't learn to drive until she was in her 50s, and at this time she was in her 60s. And she came, my cousin Mike, he's an only child, and he would get lonely sometime in the summer, so he asked my grandmother if she would come and pick my sister and me up and take us over to my grandmother's house, and we could spend the weekend there. And so she agreed to do that, and she came over to the little town of Opp, Alabama, picked my sister and me up, and we were riding in the car back through the big city of Elba, Alabama. And we were looking for what we called the Icy Store. It was a junior food store back when these stores, convenience stores, first opened. We wanted an Icy, and you can imagine a 10-year-old, an 11-year-old, and an 8-year-old telling a 60-something-year-old woman who didn't like to drive how to get to this place. And of course, we're moving through all these streets and trying to find this store, and my grandmother is trying to pay attention to what we're saying, and all of a sudden Mike says, "Granny, you just ran a red light." And oh no, this is terrible. No one hit us, we were good. But she said, "Children, there will be no Icies today." She drove us into town, into the big city of Elba, drove us to the police station, got us all out of the car, marched us into the police station, 3 children and her, and I thought, oh Lord, my grandmother's going to jail and we're going with her, which was a little bit exciting. And to be clear, I've never been in jail before or since, but we went in there to the police station and walked up to the counter, and the young sergeant was sitting there at the police station, and he knew my grandmother. My grandfather was a pastor in the county, and so they all knew them. And he looked up and said, "Mrs. Ziegler, can I help you?" And she said yes, and said his name, and said, "I'm here to report a crime." Well, he got all excited, got out his evidence book and said, "Go ahead, what happened, Miss Ziegler?" She said, "I ran a red light." And he just kind of looked at her and said, "So?" But she said, "I'm here to pay my fine." And so he went back to the back and got the chief of police, and he came back and said, "Miss Ziegler, this happens all the time. I know it was an accident. You didn't mean to do it." And she said, "No, I'm here to do what's right. I broke the law and I want to pay my fine." He realized what was going on, a smart man. He saw the grandchildren there. He said, "Okay, Miss Ziegler." He took out a book and he looked up the fine and he said, "That'll be 25 cents. Now, I know the fine in 1960-something was more than 25 cents, but apparently my grandmother didn't. And she just reached in her pocketbook and opened up one of those little rubber things that you squeeze that has a slot in it, picked out 25 cents, put it on the counter, and waited for her receipt. She received it, put it back in her purse. We went back and got in the car and drove on to her house. I told that story at her funeral, and people said that described her to a T. My grandmother was a great and righteous woman, as you can tell. But she wanted to set an example for her grandchildren. And here I am, 58 years old, and I still remember the example my grandmother set. You can tell your children and your grandchildren a lot of things, and they will ignore them. But when they see what you do, then they will emulate it. Yoi ichinichi yo. Have a nice day.